This week, we're going to look at the 9 and only 9 ways to simplify your compositions. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Composition Madhouse, where imitation is mastery, brought to you by Fosterlight Studios. My name is John. Last week, we looked at this graph, and we saw that every single photographer goes through the same exact stages, the same exact development as a photographer. The first stage is simplification, learning how to simplify your compositions. The second stage is complexification, learning how to complexify them. And this week, we're going to drill into simplicity, simplification. And the great thing about this is that once you have this conceptual structure in your brain and that you have places, you have categories to put these things, then you can work systematically through your photography to master your photography. So we're going to work through all 9 of these principles, and they're going to move from less complex to more complex. So the first way to simplify your compositions is by filling the frame. And this is one of the first things that you learn when you take any photography course, and the principle is pretty simple. If you go into a room and you take a snapshot, there's stuff everywhere. So whatever your subject is, whatever it is that you're taking a picture of, you go in and you fill your frame with that thing. So whether it's a person or an object, you make it the largest visual element in the image. So here, this is a very simple portrait of Natalie here. We took it right after she was done getting ready. And we just turned off the lights in the room, put her next to the window, and she's filling the frame. That is, she has a little breathing room on these sides, but she is the largest visual element. And it's much simpler because all of the rest of the stuff in the room is of necessity cropped out, because she is the dominant thing. So you either zoom with your feet, so walk in if you've got a prime lens, or if you've got a zoom lens, just zoom in on your subject. Similarly, this is Callie here in the bridal suite again, and she is the largest visual element. She is filling the frame, and so everything else in this room that you would see if she were smaller is now cropped out. The second way to simplify your compositions is by depth of field. Depth of field. And with depth of field, specifically shooting in a shallow depth of field, when you shoot in a shallow depth of field, the thing that is in focus is sharper, and the things that are not in focus are softer. They don't have as hard an edge. Now, your eyes will naturally look to the sharpest things first, and then the softer things second. So when something is sharp in an image, it is primary in visual hierarchy. That's what you look at first. And the things that are softer, that don't have as hard or sharp edges, that aren't as contrasty, those things will recede in compositional hierarchy. That is, you will look at them second. So here, just took one of the bridesmaid purses, stuck the ring on here, focused on the ring, and these little jewels went soft because the depth of field is so shallow. And so naturally, your eye looks here first and then here. And that's because these are softer and these are sharper. So also here, all of these stoplights, lights in windows, if you were to see them in focus, they would be smaller, they would be sharper, they would have harder lines. And if that's the way I shot this image, then the feet of this couple would compete visually for priority with the background. Because I focused on the legs of this couple and let this fall off into a shallower depth of field, then it's clear, the visual hierarchy is clear. We have the sharp things, which are primary, and the softer things, which are secondary. So shallower depth of field is simpler because it creates that visual hierarchy that's easy for your eye to walk through. You have one thing of primary importance and then a second or third thing. Similarly here, we do this all the time with portraits where we have Valerie, our bride, here, and she is sharp and in focus, and the leaves here are softer, so it makes a simpler image, because if these were in focus, leaves are very sharp edges. You would see many lines and many little shapes with a great amount of contrast, but here it's very easy to look at her first and then the soft, nice texture in the back that the bokeh has created. The third way to simplify your compositions is by means of blocking. And the principle of blocking is simple. Whatever things you don't want in your image, you put something in front of them to block it out. And the thing that you put in front of it will be softer, it will recede in visual hierarchy. So you can block with anything, objects, people, pretty much anything. So here, I am sitting in a tub. So this is a tub. These specular highlights here and here are from the faucet of the tub and the handles. And there's all the junk on the floor, right? Clothes and shoes and everything. And I wanted to block those things out of there. So I just use the edge of the tub to block it out, and you get this nice soft texture which recedes in visual hierarchy, so it's clear what you should look at first and then what you should look at second. It's a much simpler image than seeing all the shoes and all the clothes and things like that. You can use walls to block here, so I'm just smashed up against the side of this wall, and that's if I were shooting from over here in the room, so if I swung around, say 45 degrees, you would catch a lot of other things on the wall, say picture frames and the edge of other windows. But here, I'm using this to block out the majority of the space and to simplify this image so all you see is two main visual shapes, bride and then this soft wall. You can use doors to block out things. So this is at the church or the chapel on the campus of TCU, and I wanted to get a nice image of our couple here in the center. So I walked out of the sanctuary and closed the door and just jammed my foot in there to block it. So it was just a little crack open. And so these here are just the doors, and they're blocking out all these sharp, contrasty people. And so it's helping the eye see better, because it would be, these people would compete visually for our main subject if these doors were completely open. But here, they block it out and they have nice lines, nice leading lines to our subject. You can hear doors again shooting in the bridal suite, blocking out all the junk that happens in the bridal suite. You can also use people to block. So here, the whole wedding party was walking. We have some nice symmetry here. And so we can block out all the walls and the trees and the stadium over here. And it creates a much more elegant and simple image so that you know what to look at first when you're blocking all of those things out. Here I'm using a person again to simplify this composition by blocking. This is the legs of a groomsman, and you can see the edge of this. That's the pulpit up here, and then you would have windows which are very bright and so would draw attention, but we can just block all that out so we get this wonderful happy face on this bridesmaid here by means of blocking out with a person. You can block out you have images on the wall. So this is a technique that has become very popular, and you can use artwork on the walls. So anytime there's nice light on your subject and you have a dark spot on the piece of artwork, so here the nose of this, I'm guessing it's a longhorn because this is in Texas, but I don't really know. I'm using this image and this blue wash to block out all the things that you can faintly see, bridesmaids over here and makeup and all what's going on. But here there's two main subjects. We have our bride who's getting ready, and then we have this image of this longhorn. This is something we'll talk about later, a type of composition that I call concept complement. That is where when you have two visual elements, here we have our bride, and then we've got this other thing, and what's going on is that there's complementing. There's a Texas bride, and here's a Texas image going on. So this is a simpler image because we've got all this soft, low contrasty stuff that's been blocked out, and then one contrasty bride right here. You can use the edge of a picture frame to block things out. So we've got our bride Callie here, and I'm blocking out all the other things that are going on in this room and just shooting into the edge of this picture frame. You can also use reflective surfaces here with my cell phone. This is another technique that's become popular the past couple years, I think. And I've just got my 7200 lens with my hood on, and I take my cell phone out and I throw it in the end of it, and it's a wonderful technique because it does two things. The main thing that we're talking about here is we're bringing lower contrast to all the people here, which would be competing in visual hierarchy, and it also brings nice repetition of forms that are already in the image. So we've got these lights that are being reflected here, and repetition is always a wonderful thing. So we're blocking out by means of reflective surfaces, namely a cell phone here. For this last image, you can use any surfaces to block out. So this is a surface of like a table in the salon. This is something we'll talk about when we talk about all the ways to complexify your images. But when you have things of high specularity, if you can block with those, you get these wonderful bokeh textures going on here, which add a secondary nice soft element to this image. So I'm blocking with this table here, gets rid of all the salon stuff that's going on, which you normally have a million things going on, and helps us to focus on the bride. The next technique to simplify your compositions is number 4, angling. And the principle here is very simple. When you take a picture, you have your main subject. And when you look around your main subject in all directions, you've got up, down, left, and right. Typically, on one side or above or below your subject, one side will be simpler and one side will be more complex. So you can bring simplicity to your image by composing around the simple part. So here in this image, below our bride and groom, I'm on the ground and I'm shooting up at them. I'm angling up because we have this beautiful, simple sky here. If I were to angle down, you would see trees and people and cars and everything, which would be a fairly boring image. But because the sky is simpler, you can just shoot up. And typically when you're shooting up at people, you want to be further away. Similarly here, with our bride Valerie and Kenny here, I'm low on the ground and I'm shooting up at them, and this tree creates a nice soft background texture for this. If I were to shoot eye line with them, then we would catch the bottom of the tree line, and below the tree line it's going to be blown out highlights, which means large shapes of white, which will really draw the eye away. It'll be pavement and people, but here we have a nice, simple, unified texture achieved simply by angling up, because the stuff above our subject is simpler. So you can shoot up here. This is shooting up again in a bridal suite. This is how I made this image. We'll talk about in our second to last way to simplify your composition, something I've been doing recently and I absolutely love. You can also shoot down. So if what's going on below your main subject is simpler than what's going on above, which is true here, then you can shoot down. These trees have very sharp edges and are high in contrast, and that draws the eye. So we're shooting down at this unified pavement, which is this, this sort of medium gray, which is low in contrast, low in luminance, and so that's going to recede in visual weight. And so we see our bridal party here first, and it's very simple for the eye. Here is shooting down once again. This is the same place where we shot up at the sky, but I cropped out some of the cars and the paths and the people, and just used the ground as this to angle down and make this simpler. Similarly, you can look to the left and the right of your subjects. And so here on the right side over here, it's going to continue what's going on here, bushes and the hard shapes of this architecture here. But on this side, we have this flat, simple, one clean line wall. And it really helps direct the eye and make it much more simple by having been smashed up against this wall. The next technique for simplifying is by dragging your shutter, by shutter dragging. And there's two main ways to achieve this. The first way is if your subjects are moving faster than their background. The second way is if your camera is moving. This first way, this image, I did not shoot this image. This is an image that was shot by Andrea Corsi, and our subjects here in the car are moving faster than the background, so she dropped her shutter speed slow enough that the background would blur, but fast enough that the subjects would stay sharp. So we don't know, but probably around a 50th of a second or something like that. And what that does is that makes the background soft and thus recede in visual weight, and thus brings our subject forward in visual weight here and makes it much more simpler, because if this was shot at a high shutter speed to freeze all action, then that means that all of this would be very sharp, and we could see the words here, and we could see all the bricks and everything going on. And here it's very clear what to look at first. So anytime your subjects are moving faster than their backgrounds, so this can be achieved in a car, in a train, any moving vehicle, on bikes, or even if your subjects are running. So if you have your subjects running, or if you see someone running and you either pan with them or run with them, then you can achieve the same simplification. The other effect that is commonly used during receptions is by moving your camera. So it's not your subjects that are moving, but you're moving the camera. And the only other thing that you have to do with this is that you have to freeze your subject by flashing them. So here, she was dancing, and behind her was the Christmas lights. And so originally they would be points of light, so high in contrast. Here, because I've shot this at, a fifth of a second, or probably a little bit slower, these turn into soft lines and thus recede once again, and our subject is frozen here. So by dragging the shutter, we can create a better visual hierarchy, subject first, background second. The next technique for simplifying is silhouetting. And of course, the principle is very simple. If your subjects are significantly lower in luminance, lower in brightness than your background, then you can shoot a silhouette. Now, a silhouette is a simpler composition, because if you were to expose for these bushes, or say our couple right here, then that means all of these things, you would see their distinct lines and shapes. And so whereas right now we have one large black shape, or depending on how you're counting, 3 main black shapes, you would have 1,000, because you would see each leaf and each blade of grass and all the stuff on her dress. But here it's much simpler, it's much easier to see, because we've got simpler shapes, right, that are created by our subjects going into complete black. So you can shoot outside, you can shoot inside. You can do this with natural light, like in our last one, or artificial light. So these are just, indirect splashes of light in the reception area. Once again, if we were to expose for them, then it would be a much more complex, a much more difficult image to see, because you would see everything that's going on in the reception. There's tables here with all the silverware and lights and everything, and if we were to expose for them, this image would be complete garbage, because they would be completely lost, and it would be more like Where's Waldo than a beautiful silhouetted image of our couple. Here's another one in the reception area. So any large splash of light, you can do a silhouette and simplify what's going on in the room. The next technique is my favorite, and I call this hard light. In these ones, I'm going to show you a before and after, because these things are so striking. So this is, once again, that chapel in TCU, and this would be the ambient exposure. So this is what it looked like if you were to walk in the room. Now, I wanted to take some portraits of our bride and groom, and I saw that over near this window there was very hard direct light streaming in. Now, when you have very hard light, you have a wonderful possibility that I didn't know about, and typically people don't know about, because when you're first taught photography, you're taught to look for soft, indirect light, and you're taught that for a good reason, because when you're a beginner, it's the easiest light to work with. It's very forgiving. The angle of faces don't matter very much, because you have nice soft light bouncing around everywhere. But once you learn light and you learn what you can do with hard light, it becomes one of the most incredible things, because you can turn an image like this into an image like this. So this was the exact same place, but now I just threw the couple into the hard light and exposed for their faces, and you get this image, right? I think these are so cool and so elegant and so beautiful. And the cool thing about it is that you can be in one location and have two drastically different but equally beautiful images that you can create. Similarly, here with our bride Valerie, there was a lot of shade here under the trees, and so we did our first look here, and it's wonderful, nice, soft light, but there were some patches of really hard light, like right here. And so after they had their first look, I wanted to take some bridal portraits, so I brought Valerie over to one of these bright patches of light. I said, look up, close your eyes, because once again, if we're in the middle of the day and the sun's up top, that means we're going to get sun on the hair and on the eyebrow, which means we're going to create dark shadows into the eyes. So just pop that chin up and close your eyes so you don't blind yourself. And I said, grab your dress, and I just want you to spin, swish, back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth, back and forth, of course, until she feels ridiculous and starts to laugh, and you get this, right? I love this image because it's a simple image, and this is a means of simplification, because only the things that are hit by the hard light you will see. So everything else that you saw here is blocked out because of the luminance levels. Now, this works because at the current time in technological history, our eyes are better in terms of dynamic range than the sensors of our camera. That is to say, we can see more from bright highlights to dark shadows. Well, our camera can't do that, but we can exploit that and do really cool things like this. So a wonderful technique, one of my favorite things to do. Last example is here. If you see this really hard light coming through, once again, we've got this soft diffuse light right here where we can do a first look. But then while the groom was waiting, I said, just go stand over here, because there's a little walkway that goes over here, and so it's open over here, and so you got all that hard light coming in. And so I said, hey, Jason, just go face the light over there, and while he was waiting for the bride, we can shoot this. I just love those strong lines, those right angles, which is great for a groom, and you can just make just such incredibly cool pictures, and two really different pictures in the same exact location. Here's another example of what you can do. And so all our bridesmaids and groomsmen here are under an overhang here, and our bride is just face into that hard light, and you can just create really cool images. I saw this from someone else. I don't remember who it was, so I completely copied this image and did a similar composition to someone else. I don't remember who originally did it, but if you remember, I'd love you to leave their name in the comments so they can get credit for it. Now, the last two ways to simplify your compositions are kind of weird, maybe controversial, but these are just tools in the toolkit. So if you just set aside your convictions about that, these can be helpful. Now, this eighth way to simplify your compositions is Photoshop. Now that may seem kind of weird, but there are tons of things you can do in Photoshop to help bring greater simplicity to your images. So this was an engagement shoot I did, and I shot this really wide image. And when I brought it back, I realized that, well, they were too small and these trees were too sharp. So I just did some filters and blurring all this stuff up, and you come out with a better image, right? There's better visual hierarchy, and it's a better image. Is it a perfect image? No, absolutely not. But it's much better, and there's much better hierarchy, and it's much simpler than it was out of camera. This image that we saw before was actually partially Photoshopped, because when I originally shot this image, the chandeliers were very sharp, and so I looked at this image while I was shooting it, and I realized that you've got these sort of three main shapes here that were in focus, 1, 2, 3, and they were competing, and I don't want you to look at the chandeliers first, I want you to look at our bride and groom first. And so what I did was I just took another image and just racked the focus all the way to the opposite direction, took an image and then just blended these together in Photoshop. And because these are softer, once again, they recede in visual hierarchy. So it's much clearer what we're supposed to look at first, namely our bride and groom. This image that we talked about before is a very cool technique for simplifying. This was actually in that bridal suite, in this bridal suite right here, and I turned off all the lights in the room so we would have one unified color temperature. So we got the indirect light coming into the room, bouncing around and creating one color light, which is going to be much better. And then I put the bride in front of the window right here, and because that's all blown out, you don't have to do any fancy masking or anything. You just erase everything around her. Get a beautiful image like this that you would have never thought was shot in a bridal suite, which is typically terrible light, junk everywhere, but it's much simpler and much more elegant. Now, the last technique is even sort of weirder and possibly even more controversial than the last one, and that is, if you want to simplify your composition, you can just move stuff. And you can either move your subject or you can move the stuff around your subject. So once again, I know that this is against many photographers' code of conduct, especially if you're a photojournalist, and this is just a technique. And you don't have to use it, but it is one of the 9 ways to simplify your compositions, and so I wanted to be comprehensive. So here, where our bride was getting ready was pretty drab, so as I was driving in, I saw this great abandoned barn, and I knew that she would love it, and so I know this is crazy, but I took the dress with me, and I put it here, and it's a much simpler and much more elegant image. Now that was moving the subject. Here is we're actually moving stuff around the subject. So this is in the lobby of a hotel, and I saw this and I saw, oh, there's such a great focal point right in the middle of these candles. I saw this reflective surface right down here, which is like a table or something. The only problem is there's people here and here and here, and this was moved over here right in front of it, so it was all in the way. So what did I do? Just talk to the people. Hey, can you move? We got a bride getting married. I'd love to take an image. They said, sure. Got some people to help me move this stuff over here and shot this image, which I think is beautiful. So if you want simpler image, you can just move stuff, right? So that's it. That's all of the ways that you can simplify your compositions. Thanks so much for watching this week. Please, if you found it helpful, subscribe and share it with someone else. I would really appreciate it. And until next week, imitate, imitate, imitate.